People hate reading. Just ask them. And yet we still do it. How then does a game whose primary focus is reading become many people's 2019 Game of the Year? It starts with Twitter. Social media transformed the way that we read. It took away the commitment, the price of entry, and the foreign element of sitting down with an unfamiliar text and actually engaging with it. And so it convinced the world to do something that it thinks it hates. Read. Meanwhile, in Estonia, Robert Kurvitz and his entourage of punk-influenced artists, musicians, and writers had a dream. They found themselves in the CRPG Renaissance. Now, in the 90s, the CRPG represented the crown jewel of video game storytelling and immersion, something desperately sought by those in a bitter and angry post-Soviet Union slice of Eastern Europe. The group collaborated together into a new studio, Xhereon, who realized the truly unique aspect of video games, that they have the potential to be the greatest hits of music, art, and writing. And with that, they sought to create a mass product for a mass market on their terms, drawing inspiration from their anger and their pain to innovate like crazy, even if it was just for the sake of it. They knew that their game would be almost entirely reading, so they looked to the modern-day literature Bible, Twitter. Now, where I'm from, it'd be heresy to chuck out the ideas of the great American authors in favor of a website full of memes and breakdowns, but in a land where revolution was 20 or 30 years behind them as opposed to almost 300, maybe that wasn't so odd. And so Twitter birthed two tenets for their game, Disco Elysium. The first, that the writing needed to be short and to the point, like a thought. And the second, that most of it needed to be confrontational and aggressive because, well, why is that actually? It's cortisol. Our brain is a mechanism, and in Kurvitz's words, no such mechanism runs without disorder. This is the price we pay for our unparalleled ability to mirror and recombine reality. Let's face it, our reality is chock full of negative experiences, and our brain knows this. In the war between cortisol and dopamine, how many more times do we find our brains hitting the alarms compared to initiating the warm, fuzzy feeling? For most of us, our brain accepts that the world is harsh, and cortisol flows like wine, a great human disorder. With this studio, Xhereon wrote a world like the one that they grew up in, but still relatable to a schlub American like myself. It's a hard and uncompromising one, not because it was designed to work against you, but because it was designed with no one particular in mind, yet we're all trying to get what we want out of it. Confrontation is common, and despite our arms and our legs, despite the person that we see in the mirror, we don't control main character amnesiac-stricken Detective Harry in Disco Elysium. We control his mind. Or rather, we attempt to, but as we learn all too soon, you can't control your thoughts. You can only wish for them to be what you want them to be. Disco Elysium takes us on a journey of self-discovery as we struggle to learn not only who we are, but also how to cope with the fact that we inhabit a world around us and in our heads that is almost entirely out of our control. Or more eloquently put, a world in which instead of air, we exhale thoughts, but there are no trees that eat thoughts. We don't learn these truths about the world and ourselves as heroes on a quest to save the land of Revachol, but as a beast burdened with abstract thought, imagination, and the indignity of existing in a constantly decaying meat prison, the only animal aware of its inescapability. Let's see a conversation in Disco Elysium for a moment that demonstrates this. This is one that particularly caught my attention. It's a dream that Harry has, in which he speaks to a manifestation of an entity haunting him. And in the dream, this entity says some of the most cruel things I've ever read in a game. You were the first and worst time that I fell in love. Now I found someone for whom I feel a copy of my love for you. and they will not lose me. It will go somewhere. It will grow. You scared your love out of me with your crying, with the awful time we wound up having. I am no longer that person. This form has taken their place, and it will devour you. It will eat your mind. These are all things that I've thought, and most of us have thought in one way or another, as we have all felt and will feel heartbreak in our lives. And depending on our particular disorders, that may weigh heavier on some of us. But this is a dream, remember that. Nobody is actually saying these things to him, he's saying it to himself. These are what we would call intrusive thoughts, thoughts that invade our mind, and because of a particular combination of disorders in my mechanism, those intrusions often become obsessions for me. But here's where the great lesson of Disco Elysium, the big takeaway, comes in. Our thoughts are formless, endless. We are trapped with them for eternity. Good or bad, they will always inhibit our existence. We can't control them, but they can't control us, because we have the option to reject thoughts that we don't want. They won't disappear, but we can choose to not accept those thoughts as the truth. We can acknowledge them as reactions within our minds, as either cortisol sounding the alarms or just our brains doing a not so effective job at trying to look out for us. And like any alarm or any friend, we can respectfully acknowledge and reject that concern. That's okay. Your brain is not God. It's a complicated mechanism with disorder. It's not always going to be right. And with rejection, there is no obsession, which means we never make it to compulsion. We can't command our thoughts. We can only wish them to do what we want them to do. Hard lesson, I know. But for all the suffering the brain goes through, we can make some pretty good stuff out of it too. Good friends, good memories, good creations. And in that, the blossoms of that suffering and the clarity we get in living in the aftermath of it, there is reward. What Disco Elysium does is set that reward and suffering on the two sides of the coin that is the human mind whirling through the air on its way to the ground. And I love this game for that.